All right, so now we're ready to solve one-step equations. Now, this process of solving one-step equations is really the crux of pre-algebra and algebra knowledge and understanding. And so I've included algebra on this, even though this is my pre-algebra um, playlist, but this is really foundational. So let's take a look at how to do this. Well, in pre-algebra and algebra, I'm going to pretty much say that the goal, most of the time, the goal is to get the letter alone. In other words, to solve for a variable. Now, when I say solve for a variable, it really does mean, so I'm going to put this on here, this says solve. If you see solve in the directions, it means to find the value of the variable. Find the value. Please don't just think solve means to get the answer, because that doesn't help you. What helps you is to be specific and say, okay, solve means to find the value of the variable. So at any point, you can ask yourself, have I found the value of the variable? And if I haven't, then I haven't solved the equation. So let's take a look. I have some ideas that might make it easy. If you've had trouble in the past, give this a try. Let's take a look at what we call inverse operations. Now, there are other kinds of inverse operations, but I'm only dealing with adding and subtracting. Okay? So inverse operations in adding and subtracting always have to do with a zero. Okay? Because an inverse operation produces a zero. Now, why is that going to be helpful? Let's take a look. If my goal, my overall goal, is to get the letter alone, okay, so that's my goal, then my goal for adding and subtracting equations, in other words, when adding and subtracting is all that's being done, I create a zero next to the letter, to the variable. If I get a zero next to it, and I'm only dealing with adding and subtracting, well, it makes sense. That's when I've gotten the letter alone. In other words, if I create a zero plus something or a zero minus something, well, not a zero minus something, but something minus zero, I've created a situation where the variable is alone and I've solved for the variable. All right, let's take a look. Let's look at this example. 5 plus x is equal to 8. Now, we all know that that's going to be a 3, but that's not the point. And algebra means that we generalize so that we can solve problems that otherwise would be impossible in our head. Okay, so if we can get this to read 0 plus x equals something, then that's the same thing as x equals something. And we said that the definition for solving is to find the value of the variable. Well, if I have x equals something, I have the value of the variable. So we've determined to what x is equal. So our goal is always to create a zero next to the letter. That's our goal. Always create a zero next to the letter. All right, so solving equations really is about ones and zeros, and I'm not talking a binary language. I'm just saying if we can create ones and zeros, then we've solved variables, solved for the variable. Now, the zero happens when we're adding and subtracting. The one happens, we'll look at that later, that happens when multiplying and dividing. All right, let's create a zero next to the 5 in the equation that we just viewed above. So here we go. We're going to create a 0. How do we do that? Well, there's a 5. I'm going to subtract 5, right? It's being added. I'm going to subtract. So I do the same thing to both sides. That keeps my equals actually meaningful. And so now we see that the right side is 8 plus negative 5, right? The last video showed you that 8 minus 5 is the same thing as 8 plus negative 5. And I can see that that's 3. All right, so we're going to get a 0 next to the variable because this is adding and subtracting. Let's try some more. Now, you can put the subtraction below. You can put the subtraction beside it. Some people even rewrite the problem, right? And they show the subtraction or the addition like this. And that's fine. If you want to see, if you're a very visual learner, you might need to see that that is doing the same thing to both sides, and therefore it's legal. And then obviously this is combining your terms, combining like terms. 9 plus negative, right? Plus negative 9 is 0. So this gives me x is equal to the 16. Now we could check that. We can check it by doing this. Put the 16 back in place of the x. We always use parentheses in substitution. And that gives me 25 equal to 25. And I know that I'm correct. All right, so what about this second one here? I'm going to create a 0 right here, because if that's something being added to x, I want that to be 0. So what do I have to do? Well, I could just add a 7 to both sides. That's going to give me an x on the left and a 22 on the right. And if I put that back in, negative 7 plus 22 is equal to 15. Is it equal to 15? Indeed, it's equal to 15. Pardon me, let's take a look. All right, now I have a whole page of these. I would suggest for at least these first 6 that you pause the video and do your own, and then come back and check, but I'm going to let you be in charge of you. Okay, you know for yourself whether you understand it and whether you need the practice or not. All right, so this is negative 40. Now remember, this is plus and negative, right? So it's math builds. And so if you haven't watched the previous video to understand how to combine integers, you need to do that, possibly. Negative 32 plus negative 15 is negative 47. All right, let's take a look at these next 4. I'm going to subtract 10, and x is negative 12. I'm going to add 7 and 7, and x is 27. I'm going to add 7, and that's 13. I'm going to add 6, and that's negative 19. Now, what I haven't shown you yet is what happens if I was going to say what happens if I have a negative, but I'm not going to actually get into a negative variable yet. So that's in the multiply and divide. Oh, never mind. So I have plus 18 and plus 18. So I have x is equal to, what is that, 10? I'm going to add 12, and I'm going to add 12. That's going to create a 0 on the left, the x plus 0, and we see that that does get x alone. All right, now I'm not sure what happened to that, but this is an old worksheet. So, all right, I'm going to let you pause right here and see if you can do these, and then I'll give you the answers. Oh, you know what? Before I have you pause, what I'd like to do is remind you right here on number 10 and 11, before I solve for a variable, I need to make sure I fix the subtraction signs, right? You always want to fix the subtraction. So there's a minus, and there's me fixing it. There's a minus, there's me fixing it, right? Okay, so there's a minus, there's me fixing it, because then I really know what's happening. Now, it's not as important, right, if if it isn't a minus and negative. It's a little easier to see it, but okay, so go ahead and fix the subtraction, fix the minus sign, and we always fix it with 2 marks of the pencil, remember. All right, now go ahead and pause, and then I'll give you the answers for 9 through 16. Okay, well, here are your answers for those problems 9 through 16, and I hope that you were successful, and thanks so much for watching.